Arcane Mark. Hi, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Arcane Mark. Today we're going to be talking about making published adventures your own.
That's right. So, a lot of the time, you might want to make your own adventure entirely, especially if you have a lot of time, you have a lot of creative energy, you have a lot of ideas. You can make something that's customized to what you want, what your group wants, and everything in between. But for many people, that's just not a possibility because of the fact that you're busy, you have a lot of things that you're doing in your life. Maybe you don't want to have to gather lots of pieces of art for the adventure, draw a ton of maps, or maybe you don't have a ton of ideas for what the overall overarching plot of the adventure would be.
Or from the other direction, maybe you're inspired by something that you see in a published adventure and you say, hey, that's a story that I really want to tell for my friends.
That's right.
Oh, a thing called Member Milestone Chat. I did not know about that. Hey,
oh, yeah.
cool.
I think that you get a special chat when you're a member for a certain amount of time.
Happy Saturday to
so
you.
Math Guy Dave sent a member milestone
Garrett.
talking about them and saying Happy Saturday. So, yeah, exactly. You might just be inspired by something you see in a published adventure. Whatever the case may be, people often present the idea of like, well, you're just making your own adventures, or you're gonna run this published adventure right from the book. But in reality, in our experience, both before becoming game industry professionals and after, one of the ways that can be the most fun while also sort of respecting your time if you don't have a ton of time to set things up, can be taking what's in a published adventure as a starting point, so that maybe you have a map or you have an overall idea, and then customizing it, either a little or a lot. And in this episode, we're going to be discussing how to customize both a little and a lot.
Mm-hmm. So let's start by talking about customizing a little and some of the most common customizations that you might see. Right at the beginning of the adventure, a customization that you'll often see is the customization of the hook. So for example, if you have an ongoing homebrew campaign and you want to bring in a pre-published adventure and make that a part of the story, you might say, oh, well, this story assumes that, it begins because the PCs are press-ganged onto a ship, but my PCs already have a ship, and so we're going to start like partway through the story at this point. Or that this story assumes that the PCs are hired by this particular organization that exists in that campaign, but I have an organization that can fill a similar role in my campaign. The PCs are going to be hired by them instead. So change how the PCs get into the adventure, and also potentially when they start the adventure, because you might be looking at an adventure. It's like, okay, this adventure is 200 pages long. The first 20 pages don't really work for my group, but if I start, partway through, then I have a nice segue, or I just want to take this dungeon or this section.
So that's one of the first places to start, is where are we starting, and what are we going to take? What are we going to throw in? And maybe it's not as different as like your group entirely already has a ship, but maybe it's just like, well, my PCs aren't really motivated by the same things that this hook assumes that they would be motivated by. This one thinks they can be bought out for coin, but they're very idealistic, or vice versa, or maybe one or two of the players came up with this really interesting thing that's in their characters' backstories that have caused their motivations that you want to tie in more to the adventure, even if the starting hook was okay as it was. Maybe it could be even better if it was tied to the personal quests and stories of some of the PCs. So figuring out how the adventure attaches to the ongoing narrative of your campaign. And the answer might be, this is a one-off adventure. It doesn't have an ongoing narrative. But even then, finding how it attaches to your player characters and how your players are going to get engaged in the adventure could mean making some tweaks to the adventure itself. And one of the ways you can do this is not just in altering the adventure, but it can also be in having a session 0, even a session -1 before the session 0, where you chat it out with players and you tell them, you're going to be like, look, I'm going to level with you. I'm not going to hide what adventure we're actually running. And that adventure is Outlaws of Alkenstar, or Jewel of the Indigo Isles, or Curse of Strahd, or whatever it is you're running, you may want to let them know what it is and maybe like vaguely the themes. It'd be like, you're not going to be like, well, this is Curse of Strahd, but I'm not going to tell you if it has any curses or Strahds or vampires or horror. No, it could even be an Indiana Jones style adventure. No, like, you might as well go into what you think some of the main themes are. Make sure that your group is interested in some of those themes and ask them, what are you interested in? And if they have something that's like kind of connected or some ideas, you can use that back and forth with the players to make the decisions, because you don't have to do it all on your own. You don't have to guess all on your own how to integrate this pre-written adventure with what will interest your players. If you make them your collaborators, not only will they have a pretty high chance of coming up with a better idea, but here's the real secret. Even if the idea they come up with is exactly the same one you would have come up with, or maybe even slightly worse, I don't know, the fact that they came up with it means that they're going to be more invested in it because that was their idea. Like, if you tell them, hey, I think your character would want to investigate these weather phenomena because you're a sky druid, maybe they'd be like, no, I don't actually. I like other things about the sky. But if they're like, I'm a sky druid, I want to investigate weather phenomena, and you're like, okay, we're putting in weather phenomena, then they're guaranteed, or at least unless they're very fickle or hypocritical, to get interested in that because it was their idea in the first place.
Yeah. Folks are talking about running different lengths of pre-made adventures and some challenges that can come into play when you're doing long pre-made adventures, and then the adventure comes up and there's like a question that arises and the player asks, and you're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. It might be somewhere else in this entire volume. So it's certainly easier to work with the shorter adventures in that regard. I would recommend for the longer adventures that if you know sort of what are if you're doing like a really long one, it does make sense to read through it first and then make notes of what are sort of the key absolute main linchpin things, and then if those are in place, and then like the players ask a question and you give an answer that's not what's in the book, then you can customize the adventure from that point to make that particular thing true.
It's one of the freeing things about being open about the fact that you're customizing the adventure. Mm-hmm. If everyone, including you in your heart, know that you're customizing the adventure, then if you make a decision on the fly when the players ask for something that's not super obvious in the pages you're reading, even though maybe it's 200 pages later in this mega adventure, mm-hmm. You didn't make a mistake when you made a change by just making your own call for what the answer was. You customized it. If you already set your own expectations that that's what you were doing, whereas if you set your expectations of, no, we're doing it exactly as it was in the book, mm-hmm. then that means in that context, you did make a mistake if you didn't find the thing 200 pages later that you might not have even read yet.
But I was saying about like taking a note about the things that are most important would be like if you have If your campaign that you're running is one where it's like the arch villain has a plan, and in order for their plan to succeed, they need steps 1, 2, and 3 to happen, then, it would be valuable to have a note somewhere about like arch villain needs steps 1, 2, and 3. But then like if the villain minion along the way has like a different motivation or what have you, then sure, why not? Like that's easy to change because it's something that's not going to require large-scale shifts later on. But even if you do change something that requires large-scale shifts later on, I think that's something that happens to everybody running pre-published adventures. They're like, oh, wait, I just gave this answer and it wasn't exactly what it said later on. Okay, this can, that can inspire ways to customize the adventure for your group.
Restrictions can breed creativity, and sometimes the restrictions you bring on yourself by improvising an answer to a question mm-hmm. instead of being like, hold on, everyone, let's pause, and taking 15 to 20 minutes to try to find it in the adventure can lead to some interesting outcomes later on. Now, I'm not saying that you always have to do that. Maybe you have an inkling that the question they're asking for is like super duper relevant to the later plot and can derail everything that's in the adventure. And maybe you do say, hey, let's take a bathroom break. I think I need to look later in the adventure. There's always going to be times when you can apply any different technique. But in most cases, improvising is going to get you to somewhere interesting, even if you do have to make some adjustments later on. Mm-hmm. Now, those are sometimes when you're maybe inadvertently or just kind of on the fly or reactively making changes to what your players are doing or what your players are asking. There may be some times that you want to make small changes, but you're making them very intentionally. Maybe you have an idea for an interesting NPC. Perhaps it ties to the player's interest from previous campaigns. You know that they always like having a comic relief character, or they don't like having a comic relief character and there is one in the adventure and you want to swap them out. Maybe you want to swap out one of the encounters for a different one because you think that your group would get a little bored with these very repetitive encounters than one particular part.
That's a pretty common customization when you're running if a published adventure was running into space constraints and so they had to repeat encounters and you're like, well, I wanna shake this up.
Or maybe you look at the map and you're like, this is not that interesting of a battle map. Or there are 6 large creatures in this 15 by 15 room that can't even fit in this room.
Or
and
you're
you
like,
decide
hey, I own this
map.
cool map that I want to use for this adventure. Why don't I throw this map down and then I can take the encounters from this adventure and put them into there.
Exactly. So there's all sorts of reasons you might want to make a micro level tweak in the adventure. Even you might want to do that because of the fact that you know your group loves bigger dungeons or hates bigger dungeons and you want to change the size of the dungeon. Maybe it's because of the fact that you have a very good sense of timing for your sessions and they're only once a month and you're like, I'm very sure we can get through 4 encounters tonight, but not 5. And this dungeon has exactly 5. And if we do all 5 of them, we will not make it. And we'll have to stop right before the final encounter. Whereas if we cut one off, maybe I can put some of the interesting elements from encounter 3, combine it into encounter 2 into one single encounter, and we can finish it all by the end of the session.
Or maybe your group in general is one that's like, nah, we like fewer hard encounters instead of many easier encounters, and then
or vice versa.
Then you can split or combine those ideas. Another frequent change that you might find yourself making is things that are more cosmetic changes to things. Like maybe you have a dungeon. Maybe you have a dungeon that you're taking from a published adventure that's more of like a fantasy type dungeon, but you're running in more of a science fantasy setting. And so you are then going to reskin the dungeon and the monsters within, and maybe the shape of the dungeon is the same. Maybe like the general powers of the monsters are the same, but you reskin like the fire breath into like a flamethrower, like a laser cannon or something like that.
And you might even wind up changing systems when you're doing something like that. But keeping beat for beat the adventure, for the most part, similar. Like Ryza of the Space Lords, which was a playtest adventure I ran during the closed playtest for Starfinder that was basically very similar to Rise of the Rune Lords, but in the Starfinder playtest and with like random Starfinder equivalents of things. So instead of Magnamar, the City of Monuments, there was Magmar 4, the Lava and Monument Planet.
Yes.
So all of these kinds of things.
It still has like a lot of the same plot and story beats, but then you do adjust some things because of the lava and such.
That's right. Everything was replaced with space versions of itself.
Yes.
Or like the Thessalonian Empire was replaced with the Aslanti Star Empire, or etc. So there are many ways you can adjust something to put it into a different setting, even a different system that will wind up still keeping the beats and the general idea from the adventure the same. There's also, especially in systems that aren't Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where there's a wide variety of power levels your group can have, you might need to adjust the power level of your adventure in D&D 5e or in Pathfinder 1st Edition. This is very common where you'd be like, my group needs all deadly encounters or harder in 5e, or they need encounters that are like 5 levels higher than expected in Pathfinder 1, or perhaps encounters at about the same levels expected but highly min-maxed enemies.
Or maybe that there's an adventure that you're saying this would be really great thematically for my characters, but my characters are 2 levels higher than what this adventure expects. So I'm going to take this adventure and I'm going to boost the difficulty of everything, and I'm going to change out the monsters and such, or I'm going to alter them to buff them to be more powerful, or add more creatures, or whatever you wind up doing for that.
That's right. Generally, if you are adjusting an adventure for difficulty level, you're going to want it to do your best to keep roughly the same number of opponents and adjust their levels. While it's obviously much easier to be like, wow, my players, their characters are 2 levels higher, so I could just double everything in every encounter.
Yeah.
And that would be easier on you because you wouldn't have to create a 2 levels higher version of every opponent. It will generally might distort the encounters to be pretty different than they were originally intended to be.
I would say that sometimes it's worth it thematically to have some of the encounters be that way, where it's more of like, now we're like being attacked by a large number of this creature specifically. But in most cases, particularly for encounters that are intended to be on the higher difficulty end, it's better to, if you're adjusting by more than 1 level especially. Like, when you're adjusting by 1 level, okay, you can have encounters that are more crowded sometimes. But if you're adjusting by more than 1 level, then it really...
You also might be adjusting because you have more characters or fewer in your group. In that case, it is usually better to change the number of opponents. If you have if you have 8 players, each with 1 character, and you have 8 characters in your group, maybe you should double the number of opponents. Roughly. I mean, so maybe one of the opponents is unique, so you create a different unique creature to add, or several weaker creatures to add to that unique creature. But by increasing the number of opponents when you increase the number of player characters, and by raising the level of opponents when you raise the level of player characters, you tend to keep the parity with the published adventure, which, assuming that the professionals who wrote the published adventure had a good mix to begin with, will retain that mix. Now, that's not always true in published adventures. Even, you know what? We're the pros. Even the pros get it wrong sometimes. And so it's possible you will know that either for your group or maybe in general that one particular adventure had a mix that wasn't the best that it could be. One encounter, I said adventure, had the mix that wasn't the best it could be. And so when you go to that encounter, maybe you will change it differently. Maybe you will add more creatures even though you didn't have more characters. Or maybe you'll keep the same number because it was just a drastically high number even though you have 8 characters in your group.
Yeah, and you don't want to have, you don't want to have that many minis on the map because it's going to take forever.
That's right. So generally, if you try to keep parity like that, it can help compared to just doing whatever the easiest fix could be. Like Rohit in chat said that he had GMs who tried to boost up the difficulty in Pathfinder 2e for combat, but it ended up more difficult than they had anticipated. That can definitely happen. It's especially a problem if someone tries to multiply apply the elite adjustment, which already overestimates the mathematical bonus to give to a creature due to the fact that it didn't give them any other spells or special abilities. So
you definitely don't want to just multi-apply elite and weak adjustments. You can apply them once, but if you're doing it over a long, if it's for a lot of encounters, you probably want to customize things a little more than just throwing that adjustment on everything. Particularly for the more challenging creatures in the first place, because those can have an outsized effect from those. So, maybe instead of giving +2 to all those things, maybe you give +1 to the numbers, and then you give it an additional special ability or what have you.
That's right. So let's say that you actually generally like, the monsters that are in the dungeons, that you've seen the general plot beats of the adventure, but you also do want to still customize the adventure to give it your own feel, to make the players and characters feel attached to it. One great way that you can possibly do that is by adding in a table of additional encounters that are quasi-random, but that you plan somewhat ahead of time, that either happen as they're traveling from place to place, or maybe even as time passes in the adventure. Some of these encounters or plot points happen during downtime, or otherwise sort of enrich the story in ways that are just beyond the scope of a page count of a published adventure to do. That's a kind of very, very Linda thing to do in adventures.
Is adding additional
possibilities. I know that when Linda was running Kingmaker, she created so many different special kingdom events and other random things that could happen, and additional factors that would be added in beyond what was in the adventure path itself.
Yeah, it was fun to have the D100 chart of random events, and then Yeah, I mean, one thing that definitely came from Kingmaker is looking at the resources that other folks have created, who are running the same adventure as you, can be super useful. Because I had a list that was like, some of the events were in it were from the original published adventure, some of the events were from Legendary Game Supplements, some of the events were from cool things that I saw other GMs did online, and some of them were things that I came up with. And then there's the D100 chart, and then I would roll in advance of the session what events were going to happen and things like that. So.
Absolutely. You can be inspired by anything you see online, maybe a movie you watched, a book you read. If you see something interesting, you're like, that's so cool. You can jot it down and try to find a way to incorporate it into the published adventure. Sometimes that can be easier than having to be like, I'm inspired by this, now I'm going to have to create my entire own campaign to get it in there, because by seeing the other pieces and how they connect, it can be easier to find a place to slot it in.
Yeah, and it can. And I definitely have enjoyed too. Taking a dungeon out of an adventure, and just be like, oh yeah, we're gonna do like this chapter of this book of this adventure path because you guys went with some adjustments in the beginning and the end. Because we were talking about adjustments in the early part for the hook. But another thing that you'll often find yourself adjusting to fit with your campaign is the end, the reward. What do the PCs get along the way? What information do they find? Because that indicates how that's going to connect to future adventures, and also what treasures do they get. Those, to make them both fit with the themes of your campaign, and also the characters and what kinds of items they like to gather. Whether thas are, I'm going to, as simple as like, well, there is an excellent greatsword in this dungeon, but my party barbarian fights with a great axe, so I'm going to change it to an excellent great axe that they can use. Or something like, one of my characters is a figurine collector, so instead, when it makes sense, instead of saying that you find 100 gold pieces worth of gems, like it says in the adventure, maybe you find 90 gold pieces worth of gems and a figurine worth 10 gold pieces.
Sometimes these connective tissue pieces can be some of the easiest places to make an adjustment, but still have a majorly impactful feeling for your players, even though it really wasn't that hard to adjust them. And even some adventures give you a little bit of slack or leeway for adjusting connective tissue to begin with.
Yeah, or maybe it was an axe to begin with, but your barbarian is a dwarf, and you decide you're going to make it like a dwarven axe with like interesting carvings on it that indicate its history, and then that could be a start for some other adventure, like who used to wield this axe.
Absolutely. Paying attention when you're making an adventure your own. Pay attention to what the players are paying attention to in the adventure. If the adventure is supposed to be about a particular theme, but you find out early on when you're running the first session that all of the elements of that theme, the players just gloss over it or past it, and it was supposed to become important later, but they're super attached to the history of axes or some other random thing that's not part of the adventure, that can suddenly become what's important. Maybe that, instead of the mosaics that were supposed to be an important point about the history of the place, maybe it can be in the axes and the weapons, and you go into more blacksmithing and weapon forging as a theme. You add in a society of intelligent weapons and these ancient forgers into the backstory, and then that becomes what matters. It's easier to take the things that your players are already really interested in and always asking about and make them important than it is to prod and poke and herd cats the players toward the things that they keep ignoring that are supposed to be important in the adventure.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes if you find that one method of delivering the information, if it's really crucial for them to figure this sort of thing out, and then the adventure assumes that they're going to find it through mosaics, and the players are like, I don't care about mosaics. Then maybe you introduce a haunt or something that they can engage with in a more direct way.
Or maybe your group doesn't get storytelling from haunts. They just freak out and just try to destroy them immediately and ignore them. And the adventure had 10 haunts that told the tragic story of the lady who lived in this house. And you're supposed to slowly realize what's happened from those haunts. And you're like, my group is not going to realize what happened from those haunts. I'm going to replace them with an actual ghost who's going to interact with them while attacking them and say some of these things directly, because I can't be that subtle with my players.
Or maybe there's information that the PCs can get by succeeding at checks when they go. Maybe you're like, maybe they just try to get rid of haunts, but maybe there's a player who like is an investigator and they're always like looking around for scraps and clues, physical scraps and clues that are left behind, and then so you introduce more opportunities in that way. Because players tend to be more invested in information if they had to earn it by succeeding in a skill check than if it's just given to them.
Especially if there's something that the players seem interested in. Like, you read a description of a room, and they get interested in the, like, random chandelier that was just in the box text that is nothing. Well, maybe that's where you can put the clue Linda was talking about.
Yeah.
Be like, aha, well, since you checked the chandelier, there's, like, this... You see a gem in it that, like, projects a strange image of, like, a woman being strangled.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa, I'm glad I checked that chandelier. And so, like, because it was something they were interested in to begin with, they might be more likely to pay attention to the clues that come off of it.
Yeah, so you're then taking what is the the essence of the story in terms of the story expects the characters to be able to glean these particular events that happened in the past, and then you're customizing how they can get that information.
Exactly. So up until this point, we were mostly talking about whatever you want to, like, mainly do this adventure, but make some tweaks for your players. The opposite end of the spectrum, which Linda did mention a few times in passing, but that we didn't go into detail on how to do this, is where you mostly know roughly what you want to do, but you don't want to write maps or come up with too many stat blocks or something like that. So you want to pull fragments out of this adventure. Not even like a whole section, be like, I'm running a main campaign, I'll just run this adventure as a one-shot as is. But even just like bits and pieces and parts that you pull from the adventure. I like this mini
dungeon, I want to use it and change the story and just be like, I want to keep the map and the encounters here, and then...
Or maybe even the map and not the encounters.
Yeah. Or I like this one encounter. Or this NPC is cool.
Yeah. It's like, I want to keep this map, and I like the NPC that they had as the leader of this place, but I don't think this can be the leader in the storyline I'm doing right now, and my players are higher level. So I want this person to be, instead of the leader, be like their researcher who's over in this library area, where they normally just had like basic mage enemies. Yeah. I'll put what was previously the leader there, and the new leader is the demon that I already had in my plot line that the PCs were chasing, and I'll put that demon leader in the leader area. Like, you can tweak things and pull exactly what you want out of the adventure. Don't feel bad for the authors or feel like, oh, like I'm stepping all over it just to pull out these bits and pieces. Anything you like and anything you use is there to be used in the way that you want to use it. Yeah,
and then we're always talking about dungeon crawls tend to be some of the easiest ones to pull pieces out of. Though you can also pull, I also find that, because if you're pulling from like a social scene, for example, then you then have to be like, well, am I changing all of the NPCs or some of the NPCs and things like that. But you can also sometimes pull from things like chases or skill challenges or things like that.
Exactly. Or you could just pull some element that you really enjoy. Like, maybe there is an NPC in the social scene in the adventure, and like you're not going to do anything remotely similar to that social scene, but you're just too amused by this weird, like, Miss Manners grammar Nazi character that is just like correcting people's manners and any time that they make slight grammatical errors, and she's like, you mean none of them is? And you're like, this is hilarious, and I think my players would enjoy being annoyed by this character, so I'm just going to pull her completely out of the context of this and put her into this other influence. Yeah. Or even just a non-influence encounter role-playing session. Maybe she's the one who's a witness to my mystery, rather than being at a ball and a party and an influence encounter, and that they have to question her. But when they do, she, like, corrects their grammar or their manners of the question. Be like, don't you think that question was a bit too direct and gauche? Or something
and then
like that. She's
the one who's being too direct, but she doesn't recognize her own hypocrisy. The PC's like, Anyway, there was also a question from Omocorvus before about guides or advice for ways to calculate the difficulty of an encounter for first edition Starfinder.
I think that generally the first edition Starfinder encounter builder works well enough. It's just like it's somewhere in between Pathfinder first edition and Pathfinder second edition in terms of how reliable the encounter building is, because of the fact it's somewhere in between the two of them in terms of whether you can sort of like get more out of control with some of the abilities that either side, the players or the opponents, have.
I would say, you know, beyond the specific beyond like the specific rules for CR that are in there, I would take a look at what the strengths of the opponents are and how those compare to and strengths and weaknesses of the opponents are and how those compare to the strengths and weaknesses of the PCs. You know, if you know that you have an opponent that primarily deals fire damage, and you have a lot of characters who have like fire resistance on their armor, things like that, then they are going to be then they're going to be substantially easier than expected. Whereas like if you know that your characters have a weakness that they're specifically going up against that, then, or if you know that, you know, your characters aren't especially accurate at their attacks as a whole, but this NPC has like really high armor because they added armor on top of like already having a high armor class, and that because I know that's the thing for some Starfinder monsters, is just like that they're
like some of the Drow in the initial Alien Archive didn't follow the actual normal rules for how to do AC, for instance.
Yeah. So if you know that like something is particularly good or bad at something for its level, then comparing that to where your PC strengths and weaknesses are, you might want to adjust for that. Same as if the circumstances of the battlefield are particularly favorable or unfavorable to your PCs versus the NPCs. If you have something really weird going on, I'd recommend doing a little playtest of that encounter. Simulate the players going through that using some of the tactics they like to use in their characters.
Yeah, the more that your game system has a very wide variety of power levels that the players can have, the more it becomes useful or even necessary to playtest your encounters by running through and pretending that you're playing as your player characters, especially if you know what they would normally do. Like I usually did in my high optimization groups, I could run it through and I could find out, say in 3.5 D&D, hey, my group will fight this level 40 dragon and this level 21 like dead baby god, and I happen to know that the 40 dragon would be really easy and the level 21 dead baby god would be really hard because I playtested it. And that's how it turned out to be. So I put the plot points in such a way that it indicated that. Even though the level 40 dragon was explained to be very powerful, I expected the players to be able to beat it more easily and put it at a point in the campaign where that was what was fitting. Whereas I put as like a end of an arc opponent the level 21, even though it was 19 levels lower.
Yeah.
So Rohit asked, has Paizo published any anthologies for Pathfinder 2, like Ghosts of Saltmarsh for 5e? Well, there is Troubles in Otari, which is an anthology adventure in Otari where the beginner box is set and where the Abomination Vaults are. So there's definitely at least that one, and there have been others in the past as well, so you can look for different anthologies.
Rohit mentioned putting a chest full of potions before a difficult fight. That's another really excellent piece of advice. Broadly speaking, if you're concerned that what you're throwing at the characters might be really hard, giving them some making sure they have good consumables beforehand means that they can customize and use those consumables if they need to, or store them for later if they didn't. But it makes things more forgiving in that regard.
Also, like, let's say that the PCs are in a dragon's lair, and the dragon has killed multiple dragon slayers who had dragon slaying arrows, and put those in the dragon's horde. It's very reasonable that maybe the players would only find that after they defeated the dragon, which perhaps is the only dragon in the entire campaign. But it's also like, you don't need the dragon slaying arrows then. So if there's any way that maybe the PCs came in to a side entrance and they found the part of the horde that had the dragon slaying arrows before they fought the dragon, then they could at least use it against the dragon. It's not very smart on the dragon's part to put it somewhere where it can be obtained by people trying to slay the dragon, but it also it feels bad when you get, like, the item that is useful only at the end of the section where it was useful, after which it will almost never be useful again.
Yeah.
So, and Mad Guy Dave says that Claws of the Tyrant in Pathfinder is kind of like an anthology as well, although not exactly. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, anthologies are interesting because you can pull just one part of the anthology into your campaign without needing to take everything.
Yeah, what would you define as sort of like an anthology for the purpose of your question? Is it like a certain number of adventures?
It's like several adventures combined together.
It is.
Yeah.
So, I would just, what you were saying, it wasn't quite, so I wonder what you...
Well, I said Math Guy Dave said...
No, I'm saying for Math Guy, like, what... Because that might...
He wasn't the one who asked the question about the...
Oh, I see, yeah. Never mind. All right. Cool.
So...
Dragon's like... Yes, danger of a dragon slaying arrow and a dragon horde aside from making the players feel bad about getting that blade as a dragon accidentally rolling onto it while it sleeps. Yes.
Whoops. That's why they would put it in a separate container of trophies of, like, here are the things I got from all these would-be dragon slayers.
Maybe you can sneak into their trophy area first, or maybe you find, like, broken dragon slaying arrows and you're like, oh, haha, that's they clearly broke those on purpose. Because they didn't want to have those around. And then you don't feel bad because you got because that's not part of the treasure budget, that's just part of the story.
That's right. So, in general, when you're making an adventure your own, we talked about pulling a few things from the adventure or only changing a few things in the adventure in terms of the NPCs, the creatures, the treasure, the plot hook, and the rooms and where the encounters are.
We talked about maps as well. Like, you can about changing those out, either using maps that are pre-published for your own thing, or doing a pre-published adventure where you reorganize the adventures onto the new map. That's
right. So in general, those are some of the main ways. Oh, and we also talked about changing the setting, even the genre, or even the game system. So these are some of the main ways that you might make adventures your own. But you, in your own personal campaign, might have some unique thing that you want to do that's actually pretty different to any of these. And so when you're doing that, be sure to use some of our main overall tips that we discussed at the beginning of the episode. So that is, chat with your players first, figure out what they care about, pay attention to what your players are doing and what your players are paying attention to on their own. Mm-hmm. And you can use that to customize adventures to make them feel more impactful and memorable for your players than they would otherwise. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, well, I'm no name of author of adventure, so I shouldn't change it because I'm just going to make it worse. That's not true. And generally, the changes that you make to customize for your players and their interests will draw them in more. Obviously, you know what? There's exceptions on both sides there. There are sometimes the GMs are just like, I'll make this so much better. I'm going to raise everything by 10 levels harder, and I will change the rules so that this dragon breath automatically kills you, because it seems weird that you would live after being hit by fire.
Yeah. Oh, Ron has a question about customizing adventures for... if you know that the way that the adventure expects people to go about things is not remotely how your characters go about things. Like, if you have characters who are just like, I see a person here... and they're an enemy, I'm going to take out my weapon, I'm going to attack. And the adventure assumes you're going to get, like, all this information by talking.
Yes, so in that case, it's kind of similar to playtesting the combat encounters with your players. You can just go through in your head some of the non-combat encounters and be like, the thing that they expect that's going to happen here is drastically different than what I think my players are going to do. This is an issue.
Yeah, so if you have a table and you think they're either just going to attack everyone, or they're not going to want to engage with the conversation or whatever, then you can take out some of those role-playing encounters and replace them with simple combat encounters, replace them with, maybe there's if nothing else, you can always have like the sort of old stereotype of like there's a note where someone has written down the important information, because you're like they're not gonna talk to that person, they're just gonna go in guns blazing, Then maybe instead of the story being like, well, you killed the innocent person, great job, heroes, then maybe maybe the person that the story expected them to talk to is already dead, but there's a journal that's left behind and the creatures that killed them are there and you can fight against them or something.
That's right. In fact, the idea of the person that is expected to talk to being already dead and then that causing problems for them might be a good way to teach the players not to be murder hobos, because if they're supposed to talk to, let's say, the NPC is Linda. They're supposed to talk to Linda in this adventure. When they go up to her and they kill her.
Yeah.
And then you make huge problems for them. They might be like, you're just punishing us for being ourselves and having fun. And they might not learn any lesson or just might double down, right? But if they're supposed to talk to Linda and some evil enemy has killed Linda, and even though secretly, if she was alive, they would have just killed her arbitrarily, right? And then it's a huge problem. Then they don't think you're punishing them for what they're doing, because it's just like, oh yeah, wow, I hate this NPC who killed Linda for killing Linda because we needed the information from Linda. And that might sort of subtly teach them to be like, the next time that there's a situation like that is, oh, we found Linda's sister. And she has some of the information that Linda would have had. And then you go up to Linda's sister, and maybe they didn't kill Linda.
Yeah.
Or they don't kill Linda's sister because they were like, this was a huge problem. The NPC.
Yes.
Maybe they protect her because that stupid enemy is going to kill Linda's sister too and mess us up. We've got to go there and protect her now.
Because then you've created a story to encourage them to not do the murder hobo thing.
Exactly. And you do it by not making it punishing their actions, but by creating a tension where their enemies are trying to do the thing you don't want them to do. And so naturally they want to go against that because it was an inconvenience or a problem that was caused by their enemies. And Drog in chat says, I just want to give a shout out to the one AP I haven't felt the need to modify. Indigo Isles is now the gold standard in my gaming world. Excellent job, you two, and the others involved.
Thanks so much.
So, for those who are not in the know, Jewel of the Indigo Isles is an adventure path for Pathfinder 2nd Edition and D&D 5e, and Linda wrote the final section of it. There's 3 sections, and they're written by Patrick Reaney, Ron Lundeen, and Linda. And then I was the development lead for the adventure. So, basically, it just had more page count, so we were able to put in a lot of details about what to do if it gets derailed or other situations like that.
Absolutely.
And so all of these tips will help you to modify your adventures for your group, but ultimately you're the one who knows your group. Any of these tips we've said might not work for you. And then if you think, well, I would do it this way, but Mark and Linda said to do it this other way.
I do want to go back to this a little more, though, because I think this is a larger point, not just about the murder hobo table, but like if you have a table that enjoys social encounters more, or skill encounters more, then going in and saying, this is too many combats, I'm going to remove some of these and replace them with the other type of encounters that my players prefer is absolutely a good way to customize.
For sure. Like, know what your group likes and try to put more of that in. And the pre-published adventure is serving it up like the same every way, like a chain restaurant. And they're trying to make it so that for the average group, for the average table, it delivers a little bit of everything. But you know what your group wants, and you can customize it. So don't assume that the balance that's in the pre-published adventure is actually the right one for you.
Because there might be certain challenges that the pre-published adventure skims past, but is really something that your characters are into, that you want to... It's like, oh, the pre-published adventure just makes this a simple check, but I want to make this like a whole subsystem challenge because this is about research into this particular area that's of huge interest to one of the characters, and they're going to want to focus on it. Or vice versa.
The pre-published adventures are notorious for sometimes creating their own subsystem that is then like only maybe play tested with the author's own group and not with a wide range of groups, and it doesn't work for your group, this new subsystem that was entirely designed
and
in
you're
the
like, yeah, I don't
adventure.
want to do that, I just want to do like a simple victory point system.
Yeah, exactly. You can simplify it down, create something else. It's easy to do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. If you feel like, I can't even run this adventure because I don't want to do this subsystem, you should feel the ability to remove the subsystem or adjust the subsystem as just a simple part of making it your own. So, Linda, I think I covered everything I wanted to say for some easy steps to make adventures your own. Did you have anything else?
No, that's what I wanted to. That's what I wanted to discuss. Thank you all so much for joining us.
That's
please,
right.
If you like this video, please leave a like and hit the notification bell.
Yep. You can also subscribe if you want to hear more, and join if you want to support us. Also, stick around for a minute or two while we vote for next Saturday's
1 week from today
episode.
And thank you, Garland, for joining our channel.
As a leaf leshy.
Transferring over from Twitch. Now that this is what we are
So
here.
our options are build a hazard workshop, ask Arcade Mark, save my game Q&A, design diaries, errata, Arcade Mark plays, and other. Design diaries errata is about like how to errata something and like an errata process, so that you could sort of understand like the different ideas and thoughts behind errata, how and why and when different companies do errata or don't do errata, and what might happen if you put in errata as much as like some of the game designers who always want to have everything just right or just in the best way would like to do it, which is what 4th edition D&D did. And why now companies don't just errata tabletop RPGs every time like that. So it's generally about errata.
Yes, this one was inspired by an idea on last week's.
That's right.
About changing things in classes.
Yeah, people were asking about errata last time. So we have 2 votes for errata. Does anyone... we have a 3rd vote for errata. Errata.
Sort of the super topic of changing things in classes is the topic of how and when and why and all that about errata.
That's right. All right. It looks like errata, and Rohit is biased towards more errata too. You know what? I like having errata, but a lot of people learned a lesson from what happened in 4E when they did errata on everything, which honestly, was obviously a lot of work, a lot of effort, and we can talk a little bit about that
next time, or rather time after next.
Because Indeed. Next time is instead a different tyranny. So the tyranny of 3 continues. Rico tried to get us off of the tyranny, but it won't.
Tyranny. All right, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we will see you on Tuesday for whatever that is, and on Saturday.